There's growing concern that the conflict between the Syrian government and the Kurdish minority in Syria will escalate following new developments over the past few days. The Syrian government has accused the Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces, or the SDF, of building up troops in the Aleppo area of northern Syria. Now, on Tuesday, Syrian government forces and U.S.-backed Kurdish-led SDF exchanged fire in eastern Aleppo. That clash followed Sunday's declaration by the Syrian government that it had taken control over the areas, Aleppo previously, that were previously under the control of the SDF. So what does this mean for religious minorities in the area and for basic human rights? Joining me now to discuss this and I think much more, Jonathan Hessen, a senior fellow at the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. He is also the editor-in-chief and lead host of the Jerusalem-based TV7 Israel. He previously served in the IDF and the Israeli Border Guard. Jonathan, welcome to the studios here in Washington.
Thank you for having me, Tony.
All right, we just happened to run into each other in Capitol Hill. We have some, actually several friends that we share in common. But Syria is increasingly a concern for a lot of members of Congress. Northeast Syria is a place where we saw religious freedom starting to take root, 8 years ago. Increasingly Turkish forces coming over there. Now a new Syrian government. Give us the latest. Help people understand who's wearing the white hats, who's wearing the black hats, and where do things stand?
Well, Syria is a very significant complexity to deal with, also from an Israeli perspective, but broadly speaking,
neighbor.
It is a neighbor. It is a neighbor with a regime right now in Damascus that does not control its territory. It does not really control its own people at times, and it is that
because it just does not have the capacity, and the country is so fragmented.
So we need to take into account what happened in recent history. On the 27th of November of 24, we had a cessation of hostilities between Israel and Lebanon. The Iranian proxy Hezbollah was decapitated, of course, with a beeper operation that everybody is familiar with, as well as a walkie-talkie operation that Israel executed, and ultimately also the demise of the leader of this Iranian proxy that has wreaked havoc, not just in Lebanon, but has really threatened Israel and its citizens for a very long time now. The moment the cessation of hostility took root, this organization was no longer capable of assisting the previous regime in Damascus, the Assad regime, and therefore this vacuum allowed Turkey to utilize both jihadist organizations, including an organization called HDS, or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, Al-Qaeda through and through, alongside its own proxies to push south and then take ultimately over Damascus. Now, those organizations are ultimately very fractured. They don't have much in common other than being fundamentalist Muslim, jihadist in essence, and do at times also commit various massacres against minorities. They do not have any love lost to Christians, to Druze, to Jews, which we hear time and again calls to take the sword towards Israel. So there is much of that taking place. Naturally, there is a commitment by the Trump administration to Turkey and the Saudis to give this new regime a chance, nonetheless, irrespective of its tough past, as President Trump has mentioned a couple of times, and to try and rehabilitate this country into something that may bring about prosperity, that may bring about some sense of security, and then try and utilize that and the momentum injected in that in order to bring about regional security, so to speak. Israel is not entirely on board. It's very concerned post-October 7th that reestablishing the paradigm of October 6th, prior to the atrocities committed against its citizens on its southern border, may reoccur on other areas. So its new doctrine is a very important doctrine to ensure its own national security and that of its citizens. And at the same time, we see that Damascus is failing time and again to consolidate power over the minorities in Syria itself, particularly the Alawites along the coast, where on March 6th of last year, we saw a brutal massacre against the Alawites. Subsequently, we saw also in July, the 15th and 17th of July of last year, a brutal massacre against the Druze and Christians in southern Syria, where a brother in Christ, Pastor Mizza, was also murdered brutally alongside 22 relatives of his on that place, and the entire parish. I think he was actually an evangelical who just came there to share the gospel and be with the people there on the ground. He was killed, and every or the majority of the members of his congregations were also killed.
And that in part has driven a lot of alarm, raised a lot of alarm among members of Congress who were concerned about the alleviation of the removal of the sanctions that the Trump administration wanted on Syria. They were hoping it would be kind of based on behavior or performance that these would be lifted, but they were lifted. But they're watching it very carefully. The events of this last week, what does that tell us?
So this is a recurring development. Now, the events in the north also have to do much with Turkey, which does not, there is somewhat of a consensus in Turkey that the borders imposed on it post-1923, after World War I, are not legitimate and should be.
Well, there's no secret.
altered.
Erdogan wants to reestablish the Ottoman Empire.
Oh, absolutely, and he's been very open about it. But when you see the developments on the ground, it basically backs much of those aspirations, and it's being done gradually. It's not a full force invasion right now, but every neighborhood, every town, every village, slowly but surely, there is an encroachment.
And it's in those areas where many of the religious minorities were living.
They're not going after their own people, that's for sure, right? And we're seeing right now that the Kurds are being pushed back, and we will see more of this as time progresses, because this is a trend. This is not just a single time event or atrocity being committed against civilians.
All right, Jonathan, we're up against a break, but I want to continue this conversation, so I know you're going to stay with us to the next segment. Jonathan, thanks for sticking around here in studio with us. All right, I want to jump right back into this to Syria, because it's very complex. I mean, it's just, and then when you add all these different SDF and all this, it's like an alphabet soup. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? And I use that in terms of human rights, religious freedom. Where are people safe in Syria and where are they not safe?
Well, today, unfortunately, I must say, there are no good guys. It's all a matter of perspective. And when you really look down into the nuances of what's happening on the ground, it's there is the old saying, there are no permanent friends, there are no permanent enemies, there are only permanent interests. And right now, that is the approach of various actors contending with the mix in Syria. Those are hardened people that have gone through multiple atrocities over more than a decade since the civil war broke out in 2011. And
but even beyond that, they had a dictator.
They had a dictator, the Assad regime.
He was a dictator. At least they knew what they had.
Right.
But it's always been a country that's had some, well, in modern times, a lot of challenges. Unlike Iran, which I hope we get a chance to talk about in a moment, they have a foundation that if that regime goes, I think the people have a chance there.
So Syrian people are amazing people. And there are also amongst them real believers who live there, and the Christian community is very vibrant, including people who are from the Kurdish community minorities, the Sunni Muslim minorities, and others who converted to Christianity.
Right. And that's the ones that Turkey came after up in the northeast.
Absolutely. And that is something very alarming. That is something that I know here in Washington, there is a focus on those individuals who are being persecuted.
What do the Christians, the believers, and others there in Syria need to be able to have freedom? I mean, what has to happen there? Because it doesn't appear the new president, with his ties with HDS and it looks like strings from Turkey, because they basically helped him get there. What needs to happen?
Well, what needs to happen is a great question, and that is something that was deliberated at length prior to the lifting of sanctions on the Damascus regime, since the Caesar Act was a point of leverage, significant leverage that the United States had over Damascus and over Turkey and over Qatar and over the Saudis and others who wanted to see the rehabilitation of Syria within the scope of the new leadership in Damascus. The point, in fact, is that Damascus is not managing to assert its sovereignty over the entirety of the country, and it's willing to commit atrocities to try and do so. Now, President Trump's envoys are directly negotiating with Israel to try and find an accommodated solution for the South. There is ongoing efforts to find an accommodated solution between Damascus and the SDF, which has been the ground force for the U.S.-led coalition against Islamic State for a better part of a decade now, fighting, sacrificing against those jihadis, many of whom are now integrated into the new government in Damascus, right? So you ask yourself, what are we going to do in such a complex environment? And if Damascus, this attempt to form there something viable does not succeed, does this mean another decade of civil war or 20 years of civil war? What is the day after? And where are we heading from here is something that needs to be asked genuinely, because pumping prosperity into ideologically driven zealots, which is what Damascus essentially is.
Without any infrastructure.
Without checks or balances, right, is only going to fuel more mayhem. And that is...
And corruption.
And, corruption is, an issue that this region is contending with daily.
All right, we're going to run out of time, Jonathan. How can people be praying for this situation in Syria? Give us 3 things to pray for.
Well, I think the minorities in Syria are really hurting. They
literally, their lives are...
lives are on the line. Yeah. If I take the southern governorate of Sweden, which Israel pledged to protect.
A lot of Druze there.
A lot of Druze there. Also Christians. There are roughly 50,000 believers living in Sweden who are under protection of the Druze and are also faced with the same atrocities committed against the Druze during the massacres that occurred in, again, July of last year. They are being choked into submission. So there is currently a blockade, and the regime there is not providing the necessary flow of humanitarian aid to contend with winter conditions that they're experiencing right now. Pray for those people. Pray for breakthrough. And
we have members of Congress working on that. That's their big issue. They understand that situation.
They understand that situation.
They're trying to get that humanitarian relief.
But it's an uphill battle. There are so many interests at play right now, and this is not high on the priority list. Right.
Number 2.
Number 2, looking at the threats that are posed to the state of Israel.
Yeah.
I truly believe
out of Syria,
there are true threats festering on the border. And
is this from the current government?
It's also from the current. No, it's also from the current government, from Damascus, as well as other groups.
10 seconds.
3, pray for President Trump and for the administration that God grants them the discernment to really take the right decisions on this very complex issue moving forward.
Jonathan, thank you.